Welcome to the Power of Music podcast, brought to you by JM International. Get ready to explore conversations with those making a difference through music.
Hello, and welcome everyone to the JM Jeunesse Musicale podcast, a global network of NGOs that empowers young people through music across all boundaries. JMI is currently working on DigiBazaar with the aim of supporting the music sector in the process of digital transformation and bridging the technology knowledge gap. Today we are in Barcelona, Spain, interviewing people that are trying to make a difference through music by connecting music and technology. My name is Ricardo, and I'll be your host, and for this episode, I'm joined by Jeff Bacon, who's been helping business people to understand music and music people to do better business for years. Besides being a music tech consultant, Jeff is also Chief Marketing Officer of Daft Springer, a Web3 music and legal venture. Thank you so much for joining me, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a busy day. The plumber is coming. As always, the first question, what has been your journey into music?
It's been probably the path less traveled slightly. So in common with most people, my interest in music started very young. My parents were both mods from the 60s and introduced me to like Motown and the Beach Boys and Stax and that kind of thing. And I was obsessed with their vinyl collection, which had a lot of stuff in it I didn't even listen to, but loved looking at the artwork for. And then around the kind of mid to late 80s, discovered the early days of hip hop. And of course, with that sampling, a lot of the stuff I'd been listening to previously, I felt this connection to it and this kind of otherness as well. It was like tapping into a kind of a different world. And then through hip hop and sampling, kind of went back and discovered lots of other kinds of music that got me into jazz and got me into P-funk and obviously even kind of rock stuff and ambient that had been sampled, all that kind of thing. So by the time I got to university, I was an aspiring rapper that didn't really tell anyone about it and just used to record things over Mowax and Ninja Tune instrumentals on my sister's karaoke machine until I met my friend Nick, NDO66, the sophisticated party robot. He said, let's form a band. And he's wildly more famous than I will ever be now, I mean, for many things. But we formed a band at university, very kind of jazz rap oriented.
Nice.
And won a few kind of competitions locally, that sort of thing. And then it fizzled out. And I went to work in basically the emerging kind of tech economy. So the dot-com boom and telecoms. And felt like I'd lost my identity a little bit. I was just a suit that listened to music in my spare time. And that's not really how I saw myself. So I started to think, well, how is tech impacting music? And of course, at that time, early 2000s, around the advent of Napster and LimeWire and the industry reacting to kind of mitigate those things, my business savvy, let's say, my business acumen and interest in tech met an axis point with the way the music industry was developing, and that kind of got me started.
And then how did you in the end marry that tech side into music? What happened? What was your journey there?
So specifically, I was basically looking for more interesting jobs in tech, ideally in music, but any kind of entertainment, basically something that would hold my interest. And very early on in my search, I found a company called Counterpoint Systems, now known as Vistex or part of the Vistex group. And at the time, they were really the only rights and royalties calculation solution on the market. It was that or using Excel, which was pretty limited back then. I had background as a salesperson. Essentially what they needed somebody to do was talk to labels and publishers and movie production companies and so on about using this technology to streamline this whole very complicated process to make sure they were paying people correctly and on time and all that kind of thing. And I found pretty quickly that, even my knowledge of hip hop was quite useful. I remember a couple of the very senior guys at the company one day losing their hair over the fact that the ownership of a company added up to 150%. It's because they didn't realize that Scarface owned 50% and Brad Jordan owned 50% because they were the same person. So it wasn't 100%, it was just the same person and two nom de plume.
And what are you up to right now?
So I always have to hesitate before I answer this question, just to remind myself. But for about 8 years now, I've been operating as a business development consultant for the music and tech sector, which is ambiguous by design, but essentially anything you can do to grow a company, whether it be kind of sales and marketing strategy, through to recruitment, helping to secure investment, whatever it may be, I help primarily music startups in tech with that. Not always startups, sometimes they're more established companies. And I'm doing that at the moment for a selection of clients, including Rights Hub, which is a company founded by Lee Morrison, who was general manager of Believe in the UK for many years. And essentially that's a pre-distribution solution that makes sure that all of your data that's going to your distributor and going to the music recognition technology company that is listening to your stuff being played on the radio, and the data that's going to disco so that people can sync your music, all of that data is exactly the same, and you only have to put it in once, which sounds like a very simple idea, and it is not necessarily easy to achieve, to build, and Lee's done an amazing job with that, but that's what Rights Hub is. And I'm Chief Marketing Officer of a company called Daft Springer, based out of the UK, and that is a platform using smart contracts, so NFTs, smart contracts, to basically give artists and creators a way to better manage their investment in their release. So by giving equity to your team, you can kind of reward people that are contributing to your project. You can potentially negotiate better kind of upfront fees. People in your team can do better out of the back end. And it's kind of all automated and fully legal in a way that's wildly less expensive than going to a lawyer to set up a contract for these things. And people get paid automatically off the back of it. So yeah, that's something I'm very passionate about. And last but not least, I'm working with the wonderful Deborah Manis-Gardiner, the queen of sample clearance, as she's known in Forbes, to develop a kind of specialist rights management agency to help people that have fractionalized rights ownership. You know, a rapper that's been sampled 1,000 times in a load of different records and doesn't know if they're being paid for it or when they're being paid for it or by whom. Really fixing all of that kind of data to help them make sure they are getting paid, and if they want to do something with their catalogue, to leverage it in some way, they can do that. So all very much around kind of data and helping people to get paid.
So a lot of interesting topics there that I would like to dive into, but maybe first, because you mentioned NFTs, you mentioned blockchain, and we met about a year ago in Spain where you gave a wonderful presentation about blockchain and Web3 and how that could change and revolutionize the music industry. So I know you do a good job at explaining that. Could you maybe explain for the listeners a little bit what that actually is?
Sure, yeah. Okay, so the reason I whisper NFTs is it's news to no one that it's slightly a kind of toxic nomenclature at this point. So since about 2015, 2016, I've been working with companies that have been exploring how this technology can actually do things that help people. And we were doing that for quite some time and calling it things like blockchain for music or, you know, tokenization, with a view to creating kind of real utility and assistiveness in this technology. Then people hit upon the idea that you could just kind of sell an NFT with nothing in it, a non-fungible token with nothing in it. And there was a kind of gold rush for that, which, you know, the hype of which has kind of created a lot of noise around the real things you can do with this technology. And an example of that would be a smart contract. So as I say, with Daft Springer, when you create that contract. So let's say you and I are creating a track, or let's say I'm releasing a record and I want to make a video. I don't really have any money for a video, but you're my friend and you're a videographer and you said, hey, I'll make you the video. I can create a contract, and it's a legally binding contract drawn up by Clintons of London, that says, okay, for this release, Ricardo owns 5% of the release, and we're pals. I'm going to give that to you for the rest of your natural life. It could be for 2 years, it could be for 5 years, but I'm going to say 5% for the rest of your life, because if this video helps me to make some money, you've helped me take a step forward in my career. What would happen is, from my phone to your phone, I would enter the details into the contract. On your phone, you would receive an agreement and the option to agree to it. Once you click agree, a token would be minted to you, and that token, which is a non-fungible token, i.e. it's unique because it has your name on it and it's your terms that we agreed, and that token acts as provenance to prove that we have made this agreement, but also automates the process so that when revenue arrives from, say, Spotify for this record we've made together that has made us lots of money, that revenue goes directly to you. So instead of you having to chase me like 5 years later with a dog-eared paper contract, and Jeff, do you remember signing this? You owe me some money. None of that has to happen. It all happens automatically. That is a great example, I think, of the application of this technology without having to go into how it works or, what is a block and what is a chain. We can do that. It's not that important. What you need to know is that you can use it for provenance. You can make an entry on a database which can't be changed, is immutable, so there's no way of me backtracking and rewriting the contract, putting some white out on your 5%, changing it to 2%, feeding it through a photocopy. I can't do any of that, right? The contract can't get lost. It's all going to be automated. If I disappear, you're still going to get your money from Spotify when it kind of gets routed to you. So, that to me is the exciting kind of application of blockchain. And there's lots of examples of that, like Revelator, making it possible for people to pay their artists early, let's say, because you've seen the money from Spotify is coming, you don't have it yet, but it's definitely coming. Let's make a contract. I'll give you the money. When the money comes, it will come into the label. We get paid back. That kind of thing. So there's lots of great examples of how it can be used well.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And those are some good use cases. And as you stated, it's kind of overshadowed in the recent years by all the hype. Do you feel that it's going to pick up again and get kind of the spot it deserves? Yeah,
I think so. I think, with all new technological advances, and I think, AI will be the same on some level. I mean, that is probably the biggest change on our horizon coming. But these things are almost always less of a revolution than they are an evolution than people expect. The kind of hype train is inevitable, but once all the kind of speculators and tire kickers have walked away, the real stuff tends to rise to the surface. So I absolutely think there is a place for digital collectibles. Unfortunately, a lot of the early NFT projects weren't even really digital collectibles. They weren't that rare, they weren't that interesting, they weren't that scarce. The value was purely based on kind of media hype. So what we're seeing more of is digital collectibles that also have a bit of utility attached to them as well. And that's a collectible I want to collect. So, for instance, off the top of my head, Record Shop, business from the UK, which is doing a great job with that stuff. In Barcelona, we have Guzu doing some very interesting stuff in that space. And then think about even the ability of NFTs to be used in this new AI context. So Grimes, for instance, I don't know exactly what she's doing with the platform she's working with, but it's probably along similar lines to what you could do with Revelator's NFT storefront, which is to say, okay, there's a smart contract here. You want to license my voice or a bit of one of my records or whatever it is. Fill in these details. Boom, we have a token each, and I'm now going to get paid off of what you create with that. And there's a digital paper trail that says you will do that and that we have a license and all that kind of thing.
And to dive a bit more into the rights management, in the past episodes, there were two artists that actually talked about the struggles as a beginning band, like how do you divide that, or as an artist from sub-Saharan Africa fighting the big beer brands that are using his music. For any artists that are listening, what would be your advice when it comes to right management?
So taking those two examples in hand, so a band that is working out the splits, and it can be causing some kind of friction, and part of that is just being in a band. If you don't really contribute much to the writing or nothing to the writing, you don't get a writing credit. But if you're contributing anything to the writing, and this is one of the challenges I think a lot of emerging artists have today, is they don't realize they're a songwriter. I make the beats, I'm the DJ, I just came up with the chorus. Okay, well, you're a songwriter, so you deserve a bit of that. And it is a bit of a kind of test of your mettle as a band. If you're with a group of mates, maybe you do the U2 thing and you split everything equally, even though, maybe the drummer isn't writing that many lyrics, but are you a group of mates that are doing this, to bring each other up or what? So I think it's really important to have those conversations early on, and also to not put that stuff off because it seems like it's not that much fun. Because the longer you put it off, the harder it becomes to get your head around, the harder it becomes to fix things. And there are so many systems and solutions out there now to kind of simplify a lot of this sort of stuff. Well, am I a songwriter? Do I need publishing? You can go and read about that on various blogs of various companies. And then you have things like, Session, the platform out of Sweden by is it Bjorn from ABBA? It's Bjorn from ABBA, and Nicholas Molinder and Max Martin and those guys, where you can actually plug this data in, as you're recording it. And also, if you're doing that, you're learning what's required. And if you do that from the beginning, it eventually becomes second nature. It's not like a huge hassle to write down the genre of the song you've made and who wrote it and all of that. It just becomes second nature. And that will stand you in good stead for the future, when you're not having to chase money 5 years down the line. You want to be successful. You're not really making a lot of money now. But the point is, eventually you might make something. And when it comes to that, do you want to spend half of it suing each other? Then going on to the other example, it's Africa as a continent, as a music industry perspective, is fascinating to everyone because, and this is true of also parts of Asia and parts of Latin America, is that there aren't the same structures there to help people, which is a challenge. It's also an opportunity in that there's not those legacy structures that you have to dismantle before you can start afresh. There's a lot of being able to start afresh in some of these areas. Big challenge in places like Congo is that lack of infrastructure kind of relates to songs not being registered properly, people not knowing they have to do that. Maybe the organization that they register with, I don't know how good the one in the Congo is. Some are better than others, in the developing world and developed world. And then things like music recognition technology. BMAT here in Barcelona, PEX from the US, there are all kinds of MRT companies that are tracking the use of your music on TV, in a music venue, in mixes. And their reach is only so far. So, there's probably a lot that has to go on before that beer company starts paying that artist. But of course, that should be happening. Perhaps there isn't enough representation for artists as well in Congo for them to have that conversation with the beer company. Maybe the beer company doesn't even realize they need to be doing that. There's so many challenges with that kind of thing, but all addressable.
What would you say to, because I think a nice point you made is that you said, it's just part of being an artist. Like you have to kind of, take the time and effort to learn what do I have to do as an artist? Where can I register? And what would you say to artists that are just starting out? It can be quite daunting. For example, in the Netherlands, and I'm not sure if this is a global thing, you might know, is that we have this legal splits in publishing. So it's like 1/3 is the songwriter, 1/3 is the producer, and 1/3 is the publishing company. And it actually means that if you want to register your song as an artist for the full 100%, because you're self-published, you actually have to go to Chamber of Commerce and start a sort of legal entity that then says, I'm a publishing agency, that registers the last 1/3%. You cannot say, I'm just self-published and I do that. Is that something Dutch?
It
sounds like it, right?
Yes, that does sound specific to Netherlands, but again, that's not uncommon. Without wanting to offend my friends at Boomestemra, shout out to the head of digital there. You don't have to register with your local PRO, which I think is something most people don't realise. It's assumed, well, I have to go through my local one. There are every country has one. Some of them are cheaper than others. The PRS has just reduced their cost from I think 120 to £25 for the under 25s, which is a huge difference. If you're an emerging artist and you don't even understand why you're signing up to this thing, you're probably not going to put £125 into it. And in different countries, when you sign up to one PRO versus another, you might automatically sign up as the songwriter and publisher and artist, and other ones you have to register individually for those things. So, it does pay to do a bit of research around that. And really some simple Googling will get you quite a long way. Which other PROs can I join? Which PROs, will accept me as an artist and songwriter, whatever it might be. So that's something you can look into. And then you can also look at things like the Song Trust blog, I think is a great resource. It's a branding exercise, but, in order for that to be a successful branding exercise for Song Trust, the information has to be pretty good. Mm-hmm. So I think for things like that, really useful to do that kind of research.
And if I remember correctly, at least for neighboring rights, but probably also for publishing, there are also sort of umbrella collection organizations. Like I know for neighboring, there's Lime Blue.
Yes.
Which you register there, and they will register then with one click locally for all the... Which I think is a good...
Yeah, absolutely. There's also NRG, Neighboring Rights Group, out of Czech Republic. Also there's been the emergence of the IME, the Independent Management Entity, which is like a private PRO. Why would a private PRO be good? Well, as we know, non-profit organizations tend to move in a different way to profit-making organizations, i.e. maybe a bit slower. They have different kind of regulations they have to adhere to, that kind of thing. Whereas here in Barcelona, a great example of an IME is Unison Rights. So they collect publishing purely on digital. But for let's say a US artist that has quite a big following in Europe, it may be beneficial to them to just move that bit of their collections to Unison, to collect in Europe for them just on the digital, which is a relatively simple process, and they could be earning quite a lot more revenue just for doing that. But again, it's something you have to kind of be aware of before you do.
Something very different. I kind of get a feel the first time we met and I saw your presentation and also how you describe right now, we are kind of in the same industry. We're trying to do the same things here and there. You're a bit more tech oriented. I'm a bit more marketing oriented, but there's always a kind of touch point there. And I remember that you also had something in the slides about this 1,000 superfan philosophy. And that's also something that we use a lot, especially to kind of support the independent creators and give them opportunities. Would you say a few things about that?
Yeah. I mean, that's become almost so ingrained in our discourse that I've forgotten the name of the guy that coined that whole...
Kelly? Mm-hmm. Kelly?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Let's go with that.
I'd say.
Yeah. I mean, that is... I think that was extremely prescient to come up with that, because we've been talking about that for about 10 years, and it's always been true to some extent. There's always been almost like a middle class of artists, let's say, that you wouldn't describe as famous but have great careers. If you've got and just to kind of reframe it, if you've got 1,000 real fans willing to pay €100 a year, which is what, a gig ticket, a couple of T-shirts, streaming your tracks, any other merch, maybe a digital collectible, then that's €100,000 a year you're generating. And 1,000 people isn't necessarily difficult to do, considering the size of the planet and how overpopulated it is. The trick is finding them, which is becoming, in theory, ever easier. Finding them and engaging with them when you have found them. So, for instance, just in the last week, SoundCloud has announced a new feature for their kind of pro users, where an artist can directly email their superfans. That's almost kind of old technology in a way, because for years people talked about the most important thing you can have is an email mailing list.
I still say that,
right?
Yep.
It's that's more powerful, and that's what we talk about when we talk about a real fan. Is not a follower on Instagram. It's the follower on Instagram that retweets and reshares everything you do and tells all their friends about it and brings 5 of their mates to the gig, and most of what they listen to, or a significant proportion of what they listen to, is your music. That's your kind of super fan.
We always say that a follower on Instagram is a fan of Instagram who happens to follow you. A super fan is somebody who is a fan.
Yeah, and there are loads of examples of this. I mean, this example's perhaps a little out of date by now, but it was probably like 5 years ago. I remember Lil Yachty, I think, it was 5 million or 15 million followers on Instagram. It was 5 million followers, and then his album came out and sold 15,000 because they weren't following him for the music. It was an Instagram thing, which doesn't mean he can't convert more of those. But there'll be artists out there with 15,000 followers, and maybe half of those are spending $100 a year. That's a great career, So yeah, I think things like blockchain. There are blockchain solutions that can help you, find your fans, help them find you, and give them more to do when they found you.
Yeah, exactly. I give a lot of workshops to young artists, also for JMI, Imagine, for example. And I always give the same kind of workshop, but this 1,000 super fans, how to build a brand from scratch, how to kind of get followers, how to get the first 10, first 20, 40, you build from there. And then I always ask at the end of the workshop, so let's say you do a gig, because they all play a show after that, and somebody after the gig comes and asks you like, oh, that was amazing, where can I find you? What would you do? And they all say, after 2 days of explaining, well, I give them my Spotify. I'm like, no, what do you do? And then you see them thinking, oh yeah, wait, you can't reach them through Spotify, like you don't even know who they are, what they're doing. So you give them your email, or you give them, if you have very small, you give them your phone number, you send them a WhatsApp message when you're in the studio next week, and you say, oh, we just made a demo, what do you think? That's how you kind of harvest that connection.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. You're creating a relationship.
Exactly.
If you meet somebody, in a bar or at the gym, and they're interested in you and you're interested in them, and you give them your Spotify link, that's not going to go very far, is it?
Yeah, I like this idea of going from transactional marketing, where you say, oh, I have something, you pay me, and then I give it to you, to relational marketing. You say, hey, we have something in common, we share something, I have something, let's do something together. What do you think of this?
Well, I look at it's perhaps an overused example at this point, but he's still doing it and he's still making it work, is Ryan Leslie, that made, to compare to the Lil Yachty example, Ryan Leslie made $2 million off an album that sold 12,000 copies, because that's like 12,000 individual people that all wanted to spend more money on his stuff and come to his concerts and, book a cameo with him and all of that. And he got that kind of close level of fan, relationship by including his phone number, I believe, on the CD, so fans could just ring him up. If you've only got 1,000 fans or 1,000 real followers, you can give them your phone number. They're not all going to call you, but just them having the option to do it, and the few that kind of do engage with that, can make all the difference.
Yeah, and then if you have that list, then you can be creative with it. So you can offer different things. I was just looking into this. I didn't know this. It's quite an old example of this Mahomi, the rapper who released a vinyl for 3,000 euros, but only sold very limited copies, and they sold out within no time, and you cannot find it anywhere. And there's loads of examples.
An analog collectible.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Nipsey Hussle, is the first example I remember of that.
Exactly.
Was it 100 copies of his mixtape? $1,000 a piece.
Yeah.
And I think Jay-Z bought 2.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that when the idea of NFTs first came along, that was how we kind of behind the scenes, if you like, we're thinking about it.
Yeah.
Okay, we could do stuff like, there are DJs out there with dub plates, super rare versions of tracks that you've only heard if you've heard them DJ.
Mm-hmm.
Those dub plates are made of nail polish remover.
Yep.
They deteriorate after 10 years.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's make a digital recording of one of those. It should still be scarce, so let's say there's only 100 of them. The dub plate's going to disappear. Yeah. So now we've preserved that piece of music, and the person who made it has managed to leverage it into some revenue that they can invest into their lives and in their careers, and the fans have got something out of it. That to me is exciting.
Yeah, we even went one step further. We were consulting an NFT company at that time, and we had the idea of actually bringing back that old kind of white label idea where you actually you had 100 spins and it would wear out. We say, okay, you sell an NFT and you can play it 100 times, and after that it disappears.
Yeah,
that's just a fun, cool way. It's like can be like a VIP mix. Doesn't have to be the something special. You talked a little bit about AI, and we don't have to go all the way into AI, but what are you most looking forward to, most excited about in the field of tech and music? It can also be not AI, by the way.
Sure. Well, I'll touch on AI. I mean, I think it's very exciting. I'm as circumspect about it as everyone else, but also I very much believe that the way to react to these innovations is not to jump all over it, and if it doesn't do exactly what we want it to do tomorrow, write it off. I also don't think that just focusing on the kind of bad actors is particularly helpful to the overall conversation. I don't think it was cool that David Guetta made an Eminem track without working with Eminem. Yep. And, just as evidence of how uneducated even very successful people are about it, his excuse was, well, I didn't release the track, so it's not being used commercially. Well, he got hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of PR out of it.
Everywhere as well.
He was paid for that gig, right? So he absolutely did. So not a big fan of that kind of thing, but I worked a couple of years ago with a company called Mubert, who are going from strength to strength, and they are an AI generative music company that, for instance, licenses stems from artists and labels, so that anyone creating, in inverted commas, a piece of music using their machine and then licensing it for their mobile app or whatever it might be, those funds are routing their way back to the original rights holders of those stems. And I don't see that as taking any money away from, no other artist was going to get that sync opportunity. This was a very low cost kind of functional background music for an app. Your publishing company isn't pitching your music for that. So actually it's opening an opportunity for you as an artist, that previously just went to a company that just pumped out a load of things that, they got when they leaned on a keyboard. So I'm into that sort of thing. I'm less into I'm at a record label recently that was bragging to me that they had put 20,000 AI tracks just on Spotify. Like, I'm not into that, That's just diluting the pool, and I think absolutely lends credence to the argument that there should be a different royalty rate depending on if a human made it and it's, a piece of emotive art versus some background noise, I think those are different things. So there's that. But yeah, I think the thing I'm most excited about is this advent of new ways to fund, finance, manage your career and your releases without coming out of it owing a major label $500,000.
Yeah. Also, in light of the DigiBazaar project, do you think there's a knowledge gap with the industry and everything that's moving so quickly in tech? And if so, how do you think we can bridge that?
Yeah, I think there are multiple knowledge gaps and on kind of different levels. I mean, one of those knowledge gaps that's very clear to me is just people's understanding of how tech evolves. And it's probably a bit of a hobby horse of mine, but an artist who had a big hit in the 90s, I was a big fan of, and I got to know him recently, and he said, yeah, that whole blockchain thing just never happened, did it? Damp squid, you know. If you actually sit down and look at all the things that are happening that are valid and are helping, you know, there's the solutions are out there a lot of the time, but people aren't aware of them. So, you know, foundational technology takes years and years and years to bed in. So we're not going to have all the answers about AI, for instance, tomorrow. It's going to take longer than that. And there will be mistakes, and there will be successes, and there will be false dawns, and you know, pioneers that do really well for a while and then disappear as somebody works out how to do it much better. You know, that's all part and parcel of it. I keep a list of all the things that I've ever been told will never go anywhere. And that ranges from hip-hop music, skateboarding and video games through to music analytics, HD audio, you know, blockchain, live streaming. Okay, live streaming's taken a bit of a hit, but you know, there are lots of things that people said would never work and are now part of our everyday lives. So I think people need to apply that thinking a bit more to how they think about the music industry and its relationship to tech. And that includes things like, you know, flagging the things you don't like the sound of, but getting behind the things that, you know, do make a difference. And kind of, you know, do your research. There were so many people on the back of recent kind of AI activity that said, well, do you know what there should be is some technology that allows you to easily license your works so that people can, well, that's blockchain. And that's the stuff you've been saying never happened and was over for the last 5 years. That's what we've been working on is stuff like that. So, you know, I think that's a big learning as an industry we could do with embracing is just really understanding the cycle and how it works and how we can, you know, help things steer in the right direction.
Jeff, if people want to find you or link up with you, where can they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I am Jeff, J-F-F Bacon like the sandwich or bocadillo. And there's a few of us. Most Jeff Bacons are more famous than me, but you'll find me. I'm Barcelona-based, and I'm fairly obviously music, I think, from my profile. And of course, if you're interested in Right Sub or Daft Springer or any of those, you can find those quite easily and get to me that way.
As always, the last question: what is the power of music?
Music, and this again relates to tech, as far as I'm concerned, which, you know, is considered totally unemotive and all that kind of thing. But it's all about emotions, and it's the great emotional connector. It's how we, as artists, pass and process our own emotions. It's how we connect with those 1,000 fans, you know, that are relating to those emotions. And, you know, tech's role in that, to me, is, you know, helping people to kind of leverage those emotions into a career. You know, if you've put your heart and soul into, and your emotions into a piece of work, and then you don't get paid for that work, you don't get paid on time or properly, or it gets, you know, pirated and leaked, and, you know, all of those things can be helped by good tech, for want of a better phrase. And that's really what I'm about, is kind of using tech to protect us emotionally sensitive artists and make sure that we can have a life.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank you very much for listening. If you want more information about JM or would like to get involved, visit www.jmi.net, where you can find more information and look for national member organizations. Or go to www.mubazar.com to get an overview of all the amazing opportunities for musicians. It would mean a lot to us if you could give us 1 minute of your time and review and rate this podcast. And in case you have any suggestions, please feel free to reach out to us through the JMI social.